Emirates Flight 521, a Boeing 777-300, departed from Trivandrum International Airport in India, bound for Dubai on August 3, 2016. It was a routine flight, one of thousands operated by Emirates Airlines daily. On board were 282 passengers and 18 crew members, all expecting an uneventful journey to one of the world's busiest hubs. The flight had progressed smoothly. Passengers relaxed in their seats, some enjoying in-flight entertainment while others dozed off, awaiting their arrival in Dubai. The crew carried out their duties with precision, ensuring everyone was comfortable. Captain Hussein Al Maktoum and First Officer Jeremy Webb monitored the aircraft's systems from the cockpit, engaged in light conversation as they reviewed approach procedures. As the aircraft neared Dubai International Airport, the weather was clear but presented a challenge. Moderate wind shear was reported, and the temperature was scorching at 48 degrees. The pilots received clearance for landing on runway 12L, a routine approach they had completed numerous times before. The Boeing 777, a modern and highly advanced aircraft, was built to handle such conditions with ease. As the aircraft began its descent, the first signs of trouble emerged. A gust of wind disrupted the approach, and the aircraft floated slightly above the runway. The wheels touched down, but only momentarily before the plane lifted off again due to a phenomenon known as aerodynamic ballooning, a condition where an aircraft regains altitude unintentionally after touchdown due to ground effect and sudden wind shifts. The pilots, unaware of the severity of the situation, quickly decided to execute a go-around, an emergency maneuver that involves aborting the landing and circling for another attempt. But this was not going to be a normal go-around. A hidden and deadly mistake had already taken place, one that would soon push the aircraft toward disaster. As the aircraft climbed away from the runway, the pilots instinctively pushed the thrust levers forward to gain altitude. However, in the high-stress situation, the autothrottle was still engaged, set to idle. This meant the engines were not delivering enough thrust to sustain a safe climb. The aircraft was now flying at dangerously low altitude with insufficient power, a catastrophic situation unfolding in real time. The cockpit became tense as Captain Hussein and First Officer Webb struggled to understand why the aircraft was not climbing as expected. The Ground Proximity Warning System, GPWS, blared its chilling alert. Don't sink, don't sink. The realization struck too late. Emirates 521 was descending instead of ascending, and it was only seconds away from catastrophe. Down on the ground, air traffic controllers at Dubai International watched in horror as the aircraft, instead of following a normal go-around pattern, began losing altitude rapidly. Passengers inside the cabin, still strapped in, felt a sudden drop, followed by a sensation of weightlessness. Screams of panic spread through the cabin as flight attendants rushed to secure themselves. In the cockpit, Captain Hussein shouted a command, "Toga!" Ugu, short for takeoff, go-around thrust. But the command came too late. The engines, still operating at idle, needed time to spool up. The aircraft, flying at a dangerously low altitude with retracting landing gear, was seconds from impact. The reality became undeniable. There was no time left. The aircraft was about to crash. At exactly 12:44 p.m. local time, Emirates 521 slammed into the runway belly first, its landing gear still retracting. The impact was violent. Sparks flew as metal scraped against the scorching tarmac. The right engine broke loose upon impact, sending debris flying across the runway. Inside the cabin, passengers were jolted forward as oxygen masks deployed automatically. The fuselage of the Boeing 777 skidded down the runway for several hundred meters before coming to a halt in a cloud of smoke and dust. The shock of the impact was still sinking in when another, far more terrifying threat emerged. As the aircraft came to a stop, a massive fire erupted from the right wing, fueled by the ruptured fuel tanks. Flames quickly began engulfing the fuselage, spreading toward the cabin. The heat was intense, and toxic smoke filled the air, making it difficult for passengers to breathe. In the cockpit, Captain Hussein and First Officer Webb, shaken but conscious, knew they had only moments to act before the situation became unrecoverable. The flight attendants trained for emergencies sprang into action. The lead flight attendant, through sheer professionalism, immediately commanded passengers to evacuate. The problem? The emergency slides had to be deployed manually. Every second counted as the fire grew stronger, and the air inside the cabin became unbreathable. The race against time had begun. Passengers scrambled toward the emergency exits as flight attendants fought to keep order. The slides deployed, and people began jumping to safety, some suffering injuries in the rush to escape. The fire was spreading rapidly. Seconds felt like hours. The smoke thickened, making visibility inside the cabin nearly impossible. Those still inside had to navigate through flames and toxic fumes while desperately trying to find the nearest exit. Flight attendants shouted commands, their voices barely audible through the chaos. Outside, airport firefighters had already rushed to the scene, spraying foam and water onto the burning aircraft. The heat was so intense that it began melting sections of the fuselage. Emergency responders had mere minutes to contain the blaze before it consumed the entire aircraft. Then, a chilling realization hit. One of the pilots was still inside the cockpit. As passengers ran across the runway, escaping the fiery wreckage, first responders were met with another horrifying reality. The aircraft, still full of fuel, was at risk of exploding. Inside the cockpit, Captain Hussein struggled to free himself, his uniform soaked in sweat. Smoke had filled the flight deck, making it nearly impossible to breathe. His first officer had managed to escape moments earlier, but the captain was trapped. Outside, firefighters screamed at remaining crew members to run faster. The fire had reached the forward section of the aircraft, where unburnt fuel was still present. And then, in a split second, the aircraft exploded. A massive fireball erupted from the fuselage, sending shrapnel and debris flying across the runway. The shockwave was felt across the entire airport, and for a moment everything went silent. As the flames settled, emergency teams rushed to assess the casualties. Miraculously, all 300 people on board had survived, except for one firefighter, who lost his life while attempting to contain the blaze. The wreckage of Emirates 521 lay in ruins, a haunting reminder of how a single miscalculation nearly led to catastrophe. Investigations later confirmed that the failure to manually override the autothrottle during the go-around attempt led to the crash. The incident prompted immediate changes in Emirates training procedures and go-around protocols, ensuring that no such mistake would ever happen again.